us keeping lugs, because does anyone know what the generic name for big ass fans is? It's high, or it's low volume, high, or low velocity, high volume fans. And I thought that if we had lugs, it'd be like big ass fans. Everybody would get into it. So anyway, I was one that was like, oh, we're not doing lugs. Okay, lead up is okay. And I know Pat's got a air horn back there to keep me on track, so I'm going to make sure I try to stay on track here in terms of our time. I wanted to talk about some synergies that can be explored in LEED from a site development standpoint, not based upon necessarily LEED points or the LEED credits per se, but how LEED credits can tie into other regulatory requirements. So from that standpoint, regulatory requirements equals LEED opportunities. And from that aspect, here's a grouping of the sustainable sites possibilities for credits as it relates to the EPA's Clean Water Act, or also known as NPDES. And I always have to say that really slowly because otherwise I tend to mess up those initials, and then I don't want to be accused of messing those initials up, which stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It was amended, the Clean Water Act was amended in 1989 and created the water quality components of the Clean Water Act for communities, which Phase 1 communities, and you'll hear common language amongst municipalities and individuals that are in the water side of the water division side of things, talk about Phase 1 communities and Phase 2 communities, and so everyone's always going, well, what is a Phase 1 and what's a Phase 2? So a quick overview: a Phase 1 community under the Clean Water Act is a community that has a population of 100,000 or larger. And Phase 2 communities are populations generally of 100 or 10,000 or larger, or it could be based upon density of 1,000 persons or 1,000 persons per acre, or not per acre, per square mile. So there's a little difference. You can actually have a community that's a Phase 2 community that doesn't have a population of 10,000. It's really based upon density, and you'll see that up around northern Kentucky. Bellevue's a Phase 2 community, even though it only has a population of 7,000. It's because its density is so high. In the 2010 census, there's 37 communities in Kentucky that were either Phase 1 or Phase 2 that represented approximately 1.8 million people, or about 42% of the population. Now, why is that important when we get into LEED? Well, because all these requirements here have some interface with the EPA requirements. In other words, you're going to have to meet those water quality requirements or those water quantity requirements from a regulatory standpoint. So really, you're basically getting free LEED credits associated with those points, as well as then getting into some of the prerequisites that are mandated by LEED, are also mandated by either a federal regulation or a local regulation. So with that being said, some of the water efficiency credits that are associated with the project, or that could be associated with the project, in terms of reduction in terms of water or potable water use for landscape, reducing landscape down to zero potable water or using no irrigation, and then getting into the other credits in terms of how you possibly start into wastewater or into rainwater harvesting, getting into the reductions in terms of the building and the facility. So here are the other possible credits associated with water efficiency that, again, have connections to local planning and zoning regulations, because in most Phase 1 and Phase 2 communities require some type of site landscape associated with projects. And currently, many communities are also adopting green infrastructure practices. Green infrastructure parallels high-performance buildings or green buildings in the sense that we're looking at how the interface of infrastructure, especially as it relates to stormwater and stormwater management from a municipal standpoint, starts to play into reducing the amount of infrastructure that's having to be put into place. And there's been a number of studies, especially by the EPA, that really looked at overall a very broad base selection of projects across the country, and found that there was anywhere from a 20 to 30% initial cost reduction in doing green infrastructure. So it's pretty profound in the sense that that's a fairly large upfront savings as well as the life cycle savings that can be associated with green infrastructure practices.
So just for clarity,
yeah,
on a project, you can use those types of percentages as far as what would traditionally be allocated for that first cost,
yeah,
as a savings.
Yes.
And then if you can just get people to accept something that looks just a little bit different,
exactly,
then you can save that. And it doesn't look different to younger people, it looks better.
Right.
In general.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. I mean, here's an example. This is a project we did in Cincinnati, and this is a landscape median between a sidewalk and for those from Cincinnati are familiar with Cincinnati, this is Spring Grove Avenue, and that's bioinfiltration rain garden swale. So that has vast implications in terms of water quality benefits. It's serving as a rain garden, but as you can tell, that aesthetically it has a lot of benefits associated with it. And this is saving money because instead of this having an in-ground unit, now difference is these are surface conditions. In-ground units are sometimes needed, and we've used them, but we try to use them sparingly because in-ground units have a very high cost associated with the initial cost as well as the life cycle maintenance cost of them. They're confined spaces, they have to have special equipment, and it just starts driving up the cost. Whereas here, if you're doing maintenance from a water quality standpoint, you got a couple guys with those little hand pickers that pick up the trash, or you may have to use a shovel, and you're doing the water quality benefit. As well as there's some benefits in terms of getting into climate action issues, carbon sequestration, if you want to go that far. So, as I mentioned, green infrastructure, not only are you looking at your initial costs, but you're also looking at your life cycle cost reductions. Native plants, typically, from a maintenance standpoint, are 1/6 the cost of traditional plant material over a 10-year period of time. Turf is the most expensive landscape to maintain. You're looking at $20,000 on average over a 10-year period of time per acre. So it can be very costly. As well as then you're getting the water quality benefits with the native plants and the aesthetics improvements. Again, this is starting to have a mind shift in terms of, or a paradigm shift in terms of what is perceived to be aesthetically pleasing. So there are some hurdles to overcome. I'm going to go through this project real quick, and I've got just a couple of minutes, but this was a project we did about 5 years ago with JRA Architects out of Lexington. And it was a simple parking lot expansion, but it really demonstrates all these benefits from a LEED standpoint in terms of gathering those credits. This was their existing facility here. This was their existing parking lot in this area, and then this is the new parking lot that was added. And when they did the layout, they wanted to preserve, you'll see this large space right here, that they wanted to preserve that as part of their potential expansion for future building expansion of the property. And so that was a big no-no in terms of getting into that area. Well, what we were faced with was that we were needing to meet not only the landscape requirements, but we also needed to meet the stormwater water quality requirements and the water quantity requirements, and we didn't have any room on the site. So what we came up with was a solution of looking at what we can do to combine these activities. These are 2 rain gardens. They're located in the center of the parking lot. And instead of directing the water away from the islands, and as you can, you still see today, everybody wants to do what we call the volcano mulch around the trees. In other words, it's causing the water to run away from the tree as opposed to percolating into the ground. And in development, they still love to do the mounds in the islands so that water runs away. And then they'll put irrigation on it. So it was like, why? So here's the case where we directed all the water towards the center. Again, this was a collaboration between the architects from JRA, our civil engineers, and the landscape architects working together to come up with this solution. So they're all directed towards the center. And so this is a picture of the site as it was finishing up on construction. But then here it is, and so these islands right here actually serve not only from the landscape requirements to meet the local regs, so they also meet then the local stormwater regs and the local regs for water quality. Essentially, water flows in there. The plant material is allowed to do its biological uptake of the nutrients that you're getting the runoff from the site, and that also has enough volume to act as the detention for the property. Now there's some overflow that are in there, but you can't really see those. So instead of having to do the landscape islands, do something separate on the detention basin side, and then do something separate on the water quality side, we basically combined them all on top of one another and used the existing requirements for the landscape to meet these areas. And then just real quickly, a couple of shots. It also worked out well because we were able to put the lighting inside there, and then you don't have to worry about the poles getting hit. And this is shot during the rain. This is the native little blue stem over here, which is that's what it looks like in the fall. And again, it's a different look in terms of the landscape, but for the last 5 years, they haven't had to mow that. They haven't had to have any maintenance other than kind of a spring thatching of it and a fall, cut back. And with that, I'll end. And hopefully nobody's looking like that.